The storm arrived without warning, a sudden, violent tearing of the night. Rain fell in sheets so dense that the narrow forest road disappeared beneath a silver blur, each tree a shadow, each puddle a mirror reflecting the chaos of the sky. Thunder rolled endlessly, shaking the ground and rattling the roof of the car, and lightning cut across the darkness in jagged white flashes that revealed glimpses of the forest's twisted forms. Inside the vehicle, four figures sat in tense silence, each feeling the storm pressing in through the windows. The engine coughed once, twice, and then died completely. The headlights flickered and vanished, leaving them swallowed by darkness. The first sign of hope came as a faint glow through the trees. At first it seemed like a trick of the storm, a flicker of reflected lightning, but it persisted, golden and steady. The light beckoned them forward, a promise of warmth and shelter amidst the relentless rain. It belonged to a house. Jake, the driver, muttered something under his breath, a sound lost in the roar of the storm. Emma, sitting beside him, shivered despite her jacket, the cold and wet seeping deep into her bones. Liam and Sophie, in the back seat, leaned forward to see the light more clearly. All four were soaked within moments, but the necessity of shelter outweighed hesitation. The path through the forest was treacherous. Mud clung to their shoes, roots and fallen branches twisted beneath their feet, threatening to trip them into the dark. Wind tore at their clothes, whipping rain into their faces. Each step required concentration. Each breath was heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine. And all the while, the house remained ahead, a solitary beacon that seemed almost alive, glowing insistently despite the storm's fury. When they reached the clearing, the house loomed above them. 2 stories of weathered wood, roof sagging, paint peeled and flaking, yet somehow it seemed imposing and deliberate. Its windows were clouded and dark, except for one on the upper floor where a soft golden light pulsed as if it had been waiting for them. No one spoke as they approached the door. The storm's howl was nearly deafening, yet the forest seemed to pause around the house, as if holding its breath. Jake reached out and pushed the door. It opened smoothly, almost obediently, revealing the interior. The air inside was thick and scented with dust, mold, and something faintly sweet, like overripe fruit. The storm outside seemed distant here, muffled into a dull roar. The house exhaled silence. The living room was staged as if a waiting company. A dining table bore plates and cutlery arranged neatly, coated in a fine layer of dust. Chairs sat stiffly around it, cushions faded with age. A clock on the wall ticked faintly, marking time with deliberate patience. Dust motes floated in the golden glow of a lamp upstairs, where the light spilled down the staircase, dividing shadows and painting streaks across the worn wooden floor. Curiosity led them forward, each step heavier than the last. Emma's foot scraped against the floor, a dry sound in the thick quiet. A curtain quivered though no wind entered, and a door across the hall creaked as if responding to their presence. Liam froze, sensing something shift beyond the threshold. The house was watching. Each room revealed anomalies. A kitchen stove radiated faint warmth despite its disuse. Cabinets opened to reveal dishes that seemed arranged for recent use, yet coated in dust. Hallways curved in ways that made little sense, looping back to places they had already passed. Photographs hung on the walls, faces blurred by time, eyes eerily lifelike, following each of them with an unsettling awareness. The storm outside intensified. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark bursts. Shadows stretched and twisted unnaturally, pooling in corners as though they had weight and intent. They felt the house breathing around them, each creak and groan deliberate, as though the very wood held sentience. Hours seemed to pass, though time had lost meaning. The four moved cautiously from room to room, feeling an oppressive awareness pressing on their minds. Doors that had led one way now opened to new spaces, impossible configurations that made sense only to the house. The golden lamp's glow upstairs shifted, always just out of reach, guiding and taunting simultaneously. It was impossible to discern whether the house desired to keep them safe or to trap them. The silence carried expectation, a promise of revelation, and a threat of consequences. Each creak, each whisper of movement beyond the visible, reminded them that they were intruders in a domain older than any of them could comprehend. By the time they found a room to wait out the storm, exhaustion had claimed their senses. Rain pounded on the roof, thunder shook the walls, and the wind rattled the remaining glass. The house, however, remained impervious, a monolith of deliberate purpose. It was not merely shelter, it was something alive, patient, and aware of the four figures who had wandered into its depths. The first signs of abnormality came subtly. A staircase that had been straight curved in subtle angles, leading them back to the same hallway. A floorboard groaned under no discernible weight. The photograph's eyes seemed to sharpen when no one was looking directly at them. And then came the faintest echo of a sound, a soft footstep above the ceiling, a presence that was not theirs. The four huddled together in one room, walls lined with the furniture of a family long gone. Dust hung thick in the air, illuminated by the lamp's glow. Shadows moved at the edges of vision. The house breathed with them, and it waited. No one could say when the storm would end. Outside, it raged with merciless persistence. Inside, the house had begun its quiet observation, noting each heartbeat, each glance, each tremor of fear. It had been waiting for intruders like them, not to welcome, but to examine, to study, to claim. And somewhere in the upper floor, the golden light pulsed, steady, inviting, and endlessly patient. Morning did not come as expected. The storm persisted through the night, relentless and punishing, leaving a constant patter of rain against the roof and walls. The four, Jake, Emma, Liam, and Sophie, remained huddled in the largest room on the first floor, fatigue pressing on them like a weight. The golden light upstairs, steady and unyielding, seemed to pulse with the rhythm of something unseen, a heartbeat older than the house itself. The first attempt to explore was cautious. Jake led the way, hands grazing the walls as if seeking confirmation that the structure was real. Every floorboard protested, groaning under weight and pressure. A hallway stretched ahead, deceptively simple, but soon revealed its unnatural geometry. What appeared to be a straight path curved subtly, doors opening to rooms they did not recall passing. The house refused to follow the rules of logic. Liam noticed it first. A bedroom door that had been empty when they entered now held a faint warmth, as though it had recently been occupied. Dust had been disturbed. Emma traced her fingers along the edge of a dresser. The prints seemed to smear into the wood as if the surface remembered the touch. A subtle whisper of movement came from above, though the upper floor had been silent just minutes before. The photographs began to draw attention. Faces blurred by time became more distinct under close scrutiny, features sharpening unnaturally. Eyes followed them, tracking their movements, reacting to their presence. Sophie, normally pragmatic and skeptical, felt a creeping terror she could not name. Every image seemed alive, aware of intrusions. Doors began to defy expectations. Rooms looped back into themselves. A hallway that had been long and narrow transformed into a stairwell ascending impossibly steep steps. They tried marking their path, scratching lines into the floorboards, but upon return, the markings had vanished, replaced with unfamiliar patterns. The house refused to be mapped. Objects moved subtly when not observed. A chair was slightly rotated, a teacup tilted, a rug shifted. The changes were never overt, only enough to induce doubt. Whispers teased the edge of hearing, too soft to understand, too precise to dismiss. The sound carried with it the suggestion of countless others, trapped in the house, observing, calling. The first disappearance occurred without warning. Sophie, exploring a small study with tall shelves of faded books, entered a shadowed corner. The others turned to find her gone. At first they thought she had retreated to the room they had previously occupied, but the door was empty and the hallway beyond showed no sign of her passage. A faint echo of a scream, or perhaps laughter, lingered, swallowed quickly by the house. Panic began to seep in. Jake's attempts at leadership grew desperate, a tightness in his chest every time a door opened to another room, or a hallway stretched impossibly long. Emma felt the house pressing against her mind, suggesting paths, presenting illusions. The floorboards beneath her feet seemed to pulse, subtly tilting, as though the house itself were breathing beneath them. The golden light upstairs became an obsession. Its glow beckoned from room to room, staircase to staircase, always leading, always promising understanding or escape, yet delivering neither. When Jake climbed the stairs to investigate, the lamp appeared farther away, as though it had moved in response to his approach. Steps became staircases that curved impossibly, defying gravity, looping in on themselves. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, hours dissolved into what felt like days. Hunger and thirst gnawed at them, but the house's influence prevented focus on needs. The walls seemed to pulse with awareness, stretching or contracting depending on where they stood. Rooms appeared larger from some angles, smaller from others. Windows that should have revealed the outside revealed only darkness, or in rare flashes, a forest unrecognizable, twisted and alien. Jake found the first journal. Its pages were brittle, the ink faded, yet words scratched in an uneven hand told of prior intruders. Those who had come seeking shelter had vanished, one by one. The writing was frantic, desperate, warning of the house's ability to trap both body and mind. Names were listed, followed by the date of arrival and eventual disappearance. The final entry was unfinished, the ink smeared as if the writer had been interrupted mid-sentence. The house's behavior became increasingly aggressive. Sounds of footsteps echoed from empty hallways. Doors slammed without wind, and the warmth in certain rooms became oppressive, pressing against their skin. Shadows deepened, stretching beyond logical bounds. Figures appeared briefly in peripheral vision, always gone when turned toward. Whispers teased the edge of comprehension, twisting language into unintelligible threats and commands. They tried to leave. Returning to the front door revealed only solid wood where there had been a threshold. The porch sagged impossibly, the steps leading back into the forest replaced by more hallways. Even the car they had abandoned was gone, leaving only the relentless house and the storm. Fear became tangible, a living entity that crept along their spines. Sleep was impossible. Every attempt to rest was interrupted by strange sounds, distant cries, and the subtle sensation of eyes upon them. The house seemed to anticipate movement, guiding them toward certain rooms, then retracting paths they had memorized. By the end of what they perceived as a single night, the four were fractured, physically and mentally. Each had glimpsed phenomena impossible to rationalize. Walls that shimmered and breathed, reflections in mirrors that did not match their positions, voices of the missing whispering in the corners. Sophie's disappearance was a first hint of what the house demanded, the complete surrender of will and body. Emma began to record observations, trying to map the shifting layout. Every note was rendered meaningless almost immediately, lines drawn on paper bent and curved differently than the actual hallways. Liam found a room filled with cribs, each occupied by indistinct shadows, faces blurred and twisting as he approached. The whispers became coherent at times, murmuring their names, recounting their fears, reflecting their own inner thoughts aloud. The golden light upstairs now seemed to pulse in rhythm with something larger. It drew them again, irresistibly, while simultaneously causing rooms behind them to warp, elongate, and compress. Any attempt to resist was met with subtle manipulation. Doors leading back to safety vanished, hallways duplicated, and the sense of being watched intensified to a crushing weight. By the final hours of Part 2, the house had revealed its full intent. It was alive. It was patient. It did not merely shelter. It tested, observed, and claimed. The four were no longer explorers. They were prey within a labyrinth with consciousness and purpose. Each shadow, each creak of floorboards, each whispering breath of wind through the walls was a sign that the house was aware, anticipating their next steps, waiting to choose which would vanish next. Time had begun to fracture within the house. Minutes elongated into hours, hours into days that seemed to stretch beyond comprehension. The storm outside continued without pause, yet within the walls, a strange stillness reigned. Every corner, every floorboard, every flicker of light was deliberate, as though the house breathed in anticipation, watching, assessing, shaping the four intruders. Sophie had vanished entirely. One moment she had been examining a hallway lined with portraits, the next she was gone, leaving only the echo of a soft scream swallowed almost immediately by the shadows. The others searched, calling her name, traversing every corridor they had explored, but the house refused to return her. Doors led back upon themselves, hallways twisted impossibly, and even the staircase seemed to curve in ways that defied reason. It became increasingly clear that their physical attempts at escape were irrelevant. The house dictated where they could be. Fear began to mutate into paranoia. Jake moved with taut awareness, glancing constantly at corners and ceilings. Emma kept close to him, her eyes wide and unblinking, cataloging each room's inconsistencies. Liam, once the most pragmatic, found himself jumping at each creak, each whisper, each movement of shadows in the corners of his vision. Every surface, every object became suspect. Even the air felt alive, thick with pressure, as if inhaling and exhaling along with them. The house began to manipulate perception. Rooms that were familiar would subtly change when unattended, furniture shifted, floors sloped imperceptibly, hallways stretched or compressed, and light behaved unpredictably. The golden lamp upstairs seemed to beckon in different directions, alternately close enough to touch and impossibly far away, as if mocking their attempts to reach it. The four intruders began to doubt the reliability of their own senses. Whispers grew. At first, they were fleeting, subtle, almost indistinct, shivers at the edge of hearing. Soon, however, they became coherent, addressing each individually by name, recounting thoughts the others could not have known. The voices of the vanished, Sophie, perhaps others before her, intermingled with a chorus of unfamiliar, sinister tones. They recited fears, memories, insecurities. Each word was designed to break the resolve, to erode willpower. Attempts at logic failed. Maps drawn in haste became incomprehensible. Marks left on floors disappeared, walls rearranged themselves, and staircases reoriented without warning. Time itself seemed to bend. Moments of perceived rest were often hours or days elsewhere. Hunger and thirst persisted, but the mind increasingly ignored these needs, consumed instead by the necessity of navigating the house's shifting interior. Jake first felt the weight of psychological pressure when he noticed a figure in the corner of his eye, pale and barely formed, retreating whenever he attempted to confront it. Emma later saw shadows moving against walls where no walls should exist. Liam claimed to hear Sophie calling from distant corners, her voice distorted, pleading, accusing, teasing. The house was learning them, adapting to their fears, responding to hesitation and boldness alike. The golden light upstairs became more than a beacon. It was a lure, a focus for attention, a manipulation of instinct. Emma suggested ascending, but Jake hesitated, fearing it was a trap. The moment of indecision allowed the house to alter the stairwell beneath their feet. The path they had considered safe twisted, folded back upon itself, and led them to a room that seemed to exist outside geometry. Within, the air was warmer, heavier, carrying an almost tangible scent of decay mixed with faint perfume, something human, something recent. Inside the room, photographs hung along every wall. Faces blurred, then sharpened, then twisted. Some appeared familiar, bearing expressions of fear, despair, and recognition. One image, placed centrally above a mantel, seemed to capture Sophie mid-motion, eyes wide, mouth open, yet frozen forever in a scream. The room hummed with the energy of the absent, and every footstep echoed with layered whispers that distorted their perception. The first confrontation with the house's physical influence occurred when Jake reached for the central photo. The wall beneath his hands seemed to pulse, subtly contracting. His grip faltered. The image warped, the face of Sophie stretching unnaturally as though trying to scream through the paper. Emma shrieked when a gust of air slammed the door behind her, throwing her against the nearest wall. Liam stumbled as the floor beneath him warped, the room itself bending subtly but perceptibly. The house was no longer simply a setting, it was a predator, asserting itself. By now, exhaustion had reached a profound level. Thoughts tangled, perception fractured. The house's corridors became a maze of sensation rather than space. Textures underfoot, ambient sounds, and lighting dictated movement more than sight or memory. Doors were doors, but also illusions. Walls were walls, yet often not what they appeared. Each intruder realized that survival depended less on action and more on psychological endurance. The second disappearance occurred without fanfare. Liam had been examining a small hallway lined with doors, light flickering from the lamp above, when the floor beneath him seemed to tilt subtly. The world shifted. The others noticed only the absence of his presence seconds later. A faint, distorted echo of laughter lingered in the air, but it could have been imagination. The house consumed him as effortlessly as if inhaling air. Jake and Emma remained alone. Their awareness had become acute, hyper-focused on sound, movement, light, and shadow. Every creak, every whisper, every change in texture triggered instinctive reactions, but instinct no longer sufficed. The house seemed aware of thought itself, preempting movement, predicting decisions, and adjusting pathways accordingly. Sleep became impossible. Time became meaningless. The walls no longer merely contained them. They influenced thought, memory, and perception. Every reflection in mirrors became a potential trap. Eyes appeared in photographs, in reflective surfaces, and in shadows, watching, waiting, remembering, calling. The intruders realized they were being catalogued, studied, evaluated. The golden light above pulsed steadily, an unwavering rhythm in contrast to the chaos surrounding them. It was a promise and a threat, a lure and a judgment. Approaching it was simultaneously compelling and terrifying. The house had begun to assert itself completely. Escape was no longer a matter of finding a door or retracing steps. It was a test of will, a battle of mind against a sentient labyrinth that had claimed countless others before them. By the end of this part, the house had revealed its nature fully. It was intelligent, patient, and malevolent. It observed, adapted, and manipulated with precision. The intruders were no longer explorers, they were prey. Their identities, their fears, and their very perceptions were fodder for the house's insatiable appetite. The upper floor had always been there, looming just beyond reach, its golden light steady and alluring. Jake and Emma ascended the staircase with caution, each step reverberating through the old wooden beams. The closer they came to the top, the heavier the air became, thick with a smell that was both sweet and rotten, like decayed flowers in a sealed room. Each landing seemed to shift beneath them. At times, the staircase stretched impossibly, steps elongating into narrow bridges of wood that seemed to sway. At other moments, stairs compressed into abrupt inclines, forcing Jake and Emma to grip the railing tightly as though it were the only thing anchoring them to reality. The first room they reached was a library. Shelves towered to the ceiling, filled with books of varying age and condition. Dust hung in the air like a tangible fog. The books themselves seemed to pulse faintly under touch, as if aware of attention, and pages whispered softly when flipped. Titles shifted when glanced at twice, names of authors appearing unfamiliar or impossibly old. Some books bore no letters at all, just strange symbols that seemed to crawl across the page when observed for long enough. Emma's eyes widened as she noticed one shelf containing books with names scratched in familiar handwriting. She approached and recognized her own and Jake's, among others. Each book chronicled events in a life she felt she had lived but could not remember clearly. The sense of déjà vu was suffocating, as if the house were rewriting reality in subtle layers around them. The next room appeared at the top of a short corridor. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, a bedroom with a neatly made bed, dresser, and mirror. But as they stepped inside, the floorboards groaned, the walls seemed to pulse, and the reflection in the mirror did not match their actions. Emma lifted her hand, and the reflection hesitated, then raised it slowly in opposition. A distorted face grinned at her from the glass, teeth sharper than human, eyes black and unblinking. She stumbled backward, heart hammering. Jake attempted to steady her, but the room shifted again. Doors that had been behind them now led to hallways they did not recognize. The walls seemed to bend inward, narrowing the space, while the ceiling arched high overhead. Shadows pooled unnaturally in corners, moving independently of light. Every surface felt alive, each creak a response to their presence. The whispers returned, louder this time, almost intelligible. Their names were spoken, interspersed with accusations, commands, and laughter. They were warned, teased, and called simultaneously, voices layered over one another until perception fractured. It was impossible to distinguish reality from illusion. In the midst of this, a second disappearance occurred. A figure appeared in the periphery of Jake's vision, indistinct but familiar. He reached toward it, only for it to vanish entirely. Moments later, Emma realized that Liam, whom they had assumed missing for hours, had been standing silently in the corner, frozen as if part of the room. By the time she screamed, he had disappeared again, leaving behind only the echo of a whisper, calling her name with urgent malice. The upper floor became a labyrinth. Rooms multiplied, hallways looped, and doors led both forward and backward simultaneously. The golden light upstairs was no longer static, it moved, pulsing along walls, down corridors, and across floors, always just out of reach. It was impossible to determine if moving toward it was progress or a trap. Their minds began to falter. Emma saw fleeting figures in the shadows, children with hollow eyes, faceless adults, and versions of themselves twisted by fear. Jake felt the floor tilt beneath him, the ceiling stretch impossibly high, and the walls pulse with a rhythm that seemed synchronized with his heartbeat. Every step became a test of balance and perception. At one point, they discovered a hallway filled with doors. Each door contained a different scene when opened. One showed a lush garden under sunlight, another a stormy forest, another a burning house. Each doorway whispered possibilities, pulling them toward choices that led nowhere. The house seemed to anticipate their desires, twisting them into illusions to separate and confuse. Emma tried marking the walls with chalk to track their path. The markings disappeared before her eyes, replaced by unfamiliar symbols. Each attempt to map the space was met with immediate correction by the house itself. It was a predator that adapted in real time, learning their behavior and exploiting their weaknesses. The tension reached a peak when the golden light guided them into a room with a large mirror that spanned an entire wall. In the reflection, Jake and Emma saw themselves not as they were, but as versions transformed by fear, eyes hollow, skin pale and stretched, expressions twisted. The reflection stepped forward independently, mimicking movements but exaggerating every fear, every hesitation. They realized that their own images could be weaponized by the house, used against them to destabilize and manipulate perception. Every corner of the upper floor reinforced the house's sentience. Furniture shifted subtly, shadows deepened in ways that defied light, and the very air carried whispers that predicted their thoughts. Sleep was impossible. Every moment awake felt like both an eternity and an instant. Each step, each glance, each heartbeat was measured and catalogued. By the end of Part 4, Jake and Emma understood the upper floor as more than rooms and hallways. It was a psychological arena, designed to separate, confuse, and consume intruders. The golden light above was a lure and a focus, a beacon that promised understanding or release but delivered only deeper immersion into the house's labyrinth. They realized fully that survival depended on both will and perception. Every choice carried consequences shaped by the house itself. The upper floor had revealed its nature, but the house had not yet fully exerted its power. It began slowly at first, a subtle pressure in the walls, a vibration beneath the floorboards, but soon escalated into direct aggression. The golden light pulsed faster, its rhythm almost dictating their heartbeat. Shadows no longer merely followed them. They lunged, reaching with impossible limbs, brushing at their skin, cold and sharp like the edge of metal. Jake felt the first real strike of physical threat when the floor beneath him shivered violently. He stumbled, hitting the wall, and a section of it rippled as if alive. A plank lifted slightly, then slammed down just behind his heel, narrowly missing him. Emma screamed as a shadow lunged from the corner of the hallway, solid enough to feel against her shoulder, yet vanishing when she turned to confront it. The house had begun to manifest force, shaping air, wood, and shadow into a weapon. The corridors themselves became traps. Hallways narrowed suddenly, walls bending inward to squeeze them. A room they thought empty suddenly erupted with shards of wood from an unseen bookshelf, splintering and scattering as if the house had teeth. Every movement carried risk, every glance could trigger a trap. The house anticipated their instincts, turning defensive actions into peril. Their minds weakened under constant assault. Emma began to doubt reality entirely, questioning if Jake was real or another hallucination. The air was thick with whispers, overlapping voices calling out names, recounting fears, twisting memory into nightmare. Even their own reflections seemed to mock them. Mirrors became portals to impossible vistas. Flooded rooms, ceilings stretched to infinity, and faceless figures pressing against glass from the other side. Jake tried to reason, clinging to logic. He led Emma cautiously down a hallway lined with portraits. Faces shifted as they passed, morphing into distorted versions of their own. The portraits' eyes seemed to pierce, following each breath, each heartbeat. Behind one, a door appeared that had not existed before. Driven by instinct, they entered, and the floor dropped slightly, the walls vibrating as if the room were swallowing them. Inside, the house orchestrated illusions and attacks simultaneously. Objects flew without visible cause. Chairs tipped violently, books shot from shelves like missiles, and shadows solidified into elongated limbs that struck with uncanny precision. Emma stumbled over a rug that had shifted in real time, cutting her palm on the floorboard beneath. Jake grabbed her arm, but the momentary separation allowed the house to seize another opening. A plank lashed outward, narrowly missing Emma's foot. The golden light upstairs had grown unnervingly dynamic. It pulsed in patterns that seemed almost communicative, urging, mocking, guiding. They understood now that it was not a mere lamp but an extension of the house's consciousness, a lure to draw attention, to split focus, to force them into mistakes. Every instinctual move toward safety was countered by the house, bending physics and perception with ease. The first tangible sense of time distortion struck them next. Corridors twisted and looped, creating spaces that repeated endlessly. A door opened to the same hallway they had just left, yet with subtle differences, a crack in the wall, a moved rug, a shifted portrait. Every attempt to memorize paths failed. Each decision became a psychological test. Hesitation invited danger, boldness invited chaos. Emma noticed a faint outline behind a doorway, a figure, indistinct but recognizable, waving. She ran instinctively, only for the floor beneath to tilt sharply, throwing her into the wall. The figure vanished. Jake called for her, but his voice echoed strangely, as though bouncing in a space far larger than the hallway could physically contain. The house toyed with them, manifesting images of lost friends, half-formed faces, and shifting shadows to manipulate emotional states. Fear intensified. The house became a predator not merely of body but of mind. Every sensation was scrutinized, every reaction anticipated. Doors slammed with impossible force, walls pulsed under touch, and the golden light shifted, highlighting hazards, guiding them toward danger, or revealing nothing at all. The upper floor's architecture became surreal, defying all logic. Stairs twisted, angles warped, and rooms stretched to impossible proportions. In one room, the ceiling arched far above, casting shadows that moved independently, like the dark had weight. In another, a hallway narrowed until they could barely squeeze through, only to open into a space exponentially larger, filled with floating furniture and faint, whispering voices. Physical threats escalated. The house hurled shards of wood, doors swung unexpectedly, and objects collided with the walls as if propelled by invisible hands. Each time Jake or Emma attempted to defend themselves, the house adapted. Shelves collapsed strategically, planks fell in their path, and shadows extended to impede movement. They were hunted, not with claws or teeth, but with the very environment itself. By the end of Part 5, exhaustion and terror had taken their toll. Emma's breathing was shallow, her skin pale, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. Jake felt the strain of guiding both of them through impossible geometry, every misstep punished by the house's ever-present manipulation. The golden light continued its pulse above, patient, omniscient, and mocking. It was clear, the house could not be confronted directly, it could only be survived, moment by moment, perception by perception. The storm outside raged on endlessly, indifferent to their plight. Within, the house had revealed itself not merely as a structure, but as an intelligent, malevolent entity. It had tested, trapped, and attacked with precision. The intruders had learned, at last, the full extent of the danger. Survival depended on navigating not only space but the house's twisted psychology, and one miscalculation could be fatal. The upper floor had ceased to feel like a place. It had become a force. The air itself seemed thick, viscous, pressing against lungs and skin. Every movement Jake and Emma made was resisted, subtly at first, then violently. The floorboards shifted beneath their weight, walls pulsed and narrowed, and staircases stretched in directions that defied reason. The house was no longer just a maze, it was a living predator. Emma clung to Jake as they ventured down a corridor that had seemed familiar a moment ago. But familiarity was a trick. The hallway twisted imperceptibly, doors appearing where none had been and disappearing where they had just existed. Each turn brought a sense of déjà vu, as though they had traversed the same path countless times. Whispers filled the air, some familiar, some alien, blurring together into a tapestry of sound designed to unmoor their minds. A room appeared at the end of the hallway, its door ajar. Inside, the floor sloped gently, but as they stepped forward, the slope deepened until Jake's feet felt as if they were walking downhill at impossible angles. Objects floated slightly, defying gravity, shifting when unobserved. Emma reached for a small table, and it recoiled from her grasp, moving just out of reach. Shadows began to take form. Not mere absences of light, but elongated, semi-solid figures that lunged, retreated, and pressed against surfaces with purpose. One shadow moved along the wall in tandem with Jake's own movements, stretching, twisting, anticipating. When he stepped closer, it recoiled, only to strike with sharp, intangible force moments later. Emma screamed as another shadow lunged from the corner, grazing her shoulder with chilling coldness. The golden light continued to pulse from somewhere above, a constant lure. Every instinct told them to approach it, yet it had become impossible to tell if following it would lead to safety or death. The light guided them into rooms that folded upon themselves, hallways that doubled back infinitely, and staircases that spiraled in impossible directions. The house manipulated space as easily as a puppeteer moves strings. Time itself fractured. A few steps down a hallway could last seconds or hours. A room entered and exited could transform while they were inside. Sleep was impossible. Hunger and fatigue gnawed at them, but consciousness demanded constant vigilance. Every shadow, every whisper, every flicker of the golden light required attention, lest the house exploit a lapse in awareness. Jake and Emma encountered their first echoes of the vanished. Figures appeared fleetingly in the corner of vision. Sophie, Liam, half-formed, blurred, and distorted. Voices mimicked memories, recounting fears and doubts. Sometimes the echoes moved independently, seemingly watching, mocking, manipulating. When Jake attempted to reach for one, it vanished, replaced by darkness that seemed to pulse and breathe. The house escalated its aggression. Floors lifted subtly, sending them sliding toward walls. Ceilings descended just enough to brush their heads. Doors slammed shut or opened violently. Objects struck them with unpredictable force. Books flew, boards dropped, shards of wood leapt as if thrown by invisible hands. Even walls pressed outward, narrowing corridors to painful constrictions. Every physical attack was precise, exploiting fear and exhaustion. In one hallway, Emma tripped over a rug that had shifted into a wave-like shape. As she fell, the walls compressed around her, leaving barely enough space to move. Jake grabbed her arm, but the floor tilted suddenly, forcing both to scramble to maintain balance. A whisper echoed, "Why do you resist?" It was both familiar and alien, seeming to come from inside their own heads. The golden light upstairs pulsed faster, synchronizing with the rhythm of their panicked breathing. Each pulse seemed to manipulate perception. Shadows elongated, angles twisted, rooms folded. Objects moved preemptively, anticipating their paths. It became clear, the house was not merely observing, they were inside its mind. Every fear, hesitation, and instinct was catalogued, tested, and exploited. Emma's vision blurred as the walls shifted subtly yet constantly. She caught glimpses of herself and Jake reflected in mirrors, but the reflections moved independently, exaggerating panic, fear, and exhaustion. Their faces twisted into expressions of horror she did not recognize, yet felt familiar, like a memory of a nightmare half-remembered. The house forced them into choices. 2 doors appeared, identical in every detail, each leading down different hallways. Choosing wrong triggered subtle punishments, boards tilting, objects falling, shadows lunging. Each path seemed both safe and deadly, and the decision itself was a trap. Time, perception, and physical reality were now one, manipulated seamlessly by the house. By the end of Part 6, Jake and Emma were fractures of themselves, physically exhausted, mentally unmoored. They had survived direct attacks, illusions, and the manipulations of a sentient labyrinth. Yet survival offered no reassurance. Every step forward could be their last, every turn could bring disappearance, and every pulse of the golden light reminded them that the house was patient. It had infinite time, infinite space, and infinite knowledge of their minds. The storm outside continued its eternal roar, indifferent to human struggle. Inside, the house had asserted dominance. Jake and Emma were no longer explorers or intruders. They were test subjects in a living, thinking predator that sought not merely to trap but to consume every trace of their identity, body, and mind. By now, the house had shed all pretense of neutrality. It no longer merely observed or toyed, it hunted. The very walls seemed to pulse with intent, bending and twisting to anticipate every movement Jake and Emma made. Shadows reached with deliberate purpose, slithering along corners, stretching impossibly long, striking with precision timed to their instinctive reactions. The golden light pulsed overhead, relentless, its rhythm almost dictating their heartbeats. Every instinct to approach or avoid it was manipulated. The light guided them down hallways that shifted in real time, doors appearing and disappearing, staircases stretching or contracting with perfect timing to create disorientation. Jake's fatigue was evident in every step. His breaths came in ragged bursts, muscles trembling, senses dulled but painfully aware. Emma, too, teetered on the brink of panic. Each shadow, each whisper, each impossible distortion in geometry frayed their perception further. The house had become a predator not merely of body, but of mind, and they were prey in its ever-shifting domain. It began subtly. The floor beneath Jake's feet shifted imperceptibly, sending him sliding toward a wall. A shadow lunged from a corner, brushing his shoulder with cold intensity. Emma reached for him, but the hallway stretched, pulling her back as if time and space had become fluid. The house was teaching them helplessness, demonstrating that no movement could go unpunished. The first major disappearance of the upper floor occurred almost silently. Jake had been leading Emma toward the golden light, certain that it would guide them to safety. The light moved ahead, pulsating, beckoning. Jake reached a landing, glanced back, and realized Emma was gone. His voice tore through the hallway, calling her name, but only the echoes returned. Emma's perspective became impossible to track. One moment she was chasing the light, the next she was sliding through a corridor she did not recognize. Her reflections in mirrors multiplied endlessly, some moving independently, some mocking her, some appearing injured, screaming silently. Every attempt to orient herself failed. The house reshaped space around her, folding corridors, stretching rooms, compressing ceilings, and warping hallways into impossible spirals. Jake's panic surged. The house punished desperation. Doors slammed with immense force, planks dropped from above, shadows extended to block paths. He stumbled, barely avoiding collisions with walls that had shifted unexpectedly. Each step carried the risk of triggering an attack, and yet standing still was no safer. The house pressed on perception, manipulating sight, sound, and memory simultaneously. The golden light continued to pulse, omnipresent and omniscient. It was no longer merely a beacon. It was a manipulator, a guide, a trap. Every instinct to approach was countered by environmental distortions. Floors tilted, ceilings descended, objects shifted, shadows lunged. Jake realized that following the light was not an option. It was a test, designed to break their will and separate them completely. Emma's mind was fracturing. Every corridor led to a distorted echo of a place she had passed, sometimes moments ago, sometimes hours. Shadows of Sophie and Liam flickered, whispering, taunting, appearing and disappearing. Objects floated and struck with impossible timing. The house had learned their habits, predicting movement and exploiting fear with surgical precision. Jake attempted to rescue Emma, but the house resisted. Hallways looped infinitely, staircases twisted, and the golden light pulsed ahead, taunting. A subtle shift in the floorboard beneath him triggered a near fall, and when he steadied himself, he realized the hallway behind him no longer existed as it had moments before. Emma's voice called out, but it sounded distant, distorted, as though traveling through another dimension. Finally, the house claimed its next victim. Jake reached a landing, stepping into a room bathed in golden light. The walls seemed to close subtly, the ceiling lowered imperceptibly. Shadows moved to hem him in. A sudden lunge of force from above threw him against a wall, leaving him stunned. The light shifted. When he tried to orient himself, he found he was alone. Emma's voice echoed faintly, distorted, coming from multiple directions, then disappeared entirely. The realization hit with crushing weight. Separation was the house's design. It hunted individually, exploiting fear and isolation. Jake, alone, understood that survival depended entirely on controlling perception, resisting panic, and navigating the labyrinthine horror of a sentient structure that now moved with complete autonomy. Every corridor, every room, every shadow had intent. Even when still, Jake felt the house probing his mind, cataloging weaknesses, predicting instinctive reactions, shaping the environment to test, torment, and ultimately consume. The golden light continued to pulse, patient, inexorable, and omnipotent. By the end of Part 7, the house had demonstrated its full predatory power. One of the remaining intruders, Emma, was now fully lost, claimed by the house. Jake remained alone, physically exhausted, psychologically frayed. The house actively manipulated perception, space, time, and gravity. Shadows, objects, and illusions became direct weapons. The storm outside had not abated. The house's walls trembled with power. The golden light beckoned, promising revelation or destruction. Jake understood fully now. The house did not merely trap. It hunted, consumed, and reshaped reality itself to feed upon fear and will. Alone now, Jake moved with extreme caution, every sense stretched taut. The house no longer merely confined him. It hunted him with precision. Hallways twisted in impossible loops, ceilings arched and fell, and shadows reached with intent, slithering along walls and corners to anticipate movement. Even the air seemed denser, heavier, as if it carried weight and force, pressing against him like a tangible barrier. The golden light pulsed relentlessly from above, its rhythm now dictating his heartbeat. Jake realized following it was both a lure and a challenge. Each pulse seemed to manipulate his perceptions. Angles shifted, corridors elongated, shadows bent unnaturally. Doors appeared and vanished, hallways doubled back infinitely, and staircases spiraled in ways that defied gravity. He stumbled upon a room unlike any he had seen before. The floor appeared solid, but as he stepped, it rippled like water. Reflections in mirrors multiplied endlessly, some independent of reality, some distorted into twisted parodies of himself and Emma. Whispers filled the space, overlapping, recounting fears, memories, and doubts. Each word was designed to destabilize, to blur the line between perception and reality. Jake's exhaustion grew. Hunger, thirst, and fear weighed upon him, but the house demanded constant vigilance. Every misstep was punished, shadows struck with cold force, objects hurled with uncanny precision, walls closed subtly to confine movement. The house had learned him, adapted to every instinct, and now exploited them fully. In one corridor, a sudden distortion made the hallway seem to extend forever. A door at the end glowed faintly with golden light. Jake approached cautiously, feeling every floorboard vibrate beneath his weight. As he drew near, a shadow lunged from a corner, wrapping around his ankle. He stumbled but managed to steady himself, narrowly avoiding a sharp splinter of wood that shot from the wall. The house's influence over perception became more insidious. Jake glimpsed rooms where the floor shifted beneath his feet, ceilings expanded to impossible heights, and shadows moved independently of light. The golden light above pulsed faster, almost mocking him, guiding him towards spaces that promised escape yet concealed danger. He paused to catch his breath in a small room with mirrors lining the walls. In one, he saw Emma's distorted reflection, screaming silently, her eyes wide with terror. Another mirror showed himself, pale and gaunt, shadows beneath his eyes exaggerated. Yet each reflection moved independently, stepping closer to him, mocking and menacing. He realized the mirrors were weapons, extensions of the house, shaping fear into a tangible force. Navigating the upper floor became an exercise in survival. Jake used markings to track progress, scratching into walls and floors. Each mark, however, vanished almost immediately or twisted into strange symbols, leaving him disoriented. Whispers layered with multiple voices, Emma, Sophie, Liam, overlapped with alien tones, confusing his mind further. He encountered his first physical trap deliberately set to exploit exhaustion. A hallway narrowed subtly, walls pressing inward, and floorboards tilting beneath his weight. Shadows lunged from corners, striking with calculated precision. Objects launched from unseen sources. Planks, shards of wood, and broken furniture forced Jake to duck, dodge, and leap with all his remaining strength. The house was testing endurance as much as fear. The golden light beckoned still. Jake understood instinctively that it was not a destination but a lure. He approached cautiously, observing how each pulse altered surroundings. Hallways shifted, doors appeared where none had been, and staircases spiraled in impossible ways. Following it required balancing instinct with caution. Every movement could trigger a trap or mislead him into a loop of endless corridors. In one vast room, he witnessed a horrifying tableau, shadowed figures of the missing, Sophie, Liam, and Emma, standing motionless, faces blurred, some screaming silently, others frozen in terror. The room's walls pulsed in rhythm with the golden light, and shadows moved to separate him from the vision, testing his resolve. He understood. The house used past victims as psychological weapons, displays of inevitability to weaken resistance. Jake pressed on. He discovered a staircase rising impossibly, stretching into darkness above. The golden light pulsed at its apex, a beacon and a threat. Every instinct urged him to climb, yet hesitation proved dangerous. Shadows lunged from corners, floorboards shifted, objects struck. The house manipulated space and time in tandem, creating a reality where no step was truly safe, yet inaction was fatal. By the end of Part 8, Jake had learned the house's patterns, enough to navigate through traps and illusions with minimal injury. Yet he was alone, exhausted, and psychologically frayed. The golden light still pulsed ahead, omnipresent and omniscient, guiding him toward a confrontation he sensed but could not yet fully understand. Jake's pace had slowed to a cautious crawl, senses straining to parse the impossible geometry around him. Every hallway stretched infinitely, then folded back on itself. Shadows clung to corners, lunging unpredictably. Objects moved with preternatural timing. The house no longer simply guided or manipulated, it attacked directly, asserting dominance in every action. The golden light pulsed above, its rhythm now a tangible force. Each pulse seemed to warp the floor beneath him, elongate corridors, or bend ceilings. It was both a guide and a weapon, a psychological trap to force decisions that carried risk of death or disappearance. Jake understood that reaching the light meant confrontation, the culmination of the house's design. Suddenly, the house struck. A hallway narrowed violently, walls compressing, while floorboards tilted beneath his feet. He stumbled, barely catching himself against a warped railing. Shadows lunged from every corner, thin, solid, and impossibly fast. One wrapped around his leg, yanking him to the ground. He struggled, adrenaline surging, narrowly avoiding a plank that fell with the precision of a predator. Every instinct demanded flight, but flight offered no safety. The house anticipated movement, exploiting hesitation and instinct. Jake twisted, dodged, and leapt as the walls pulsed, shadows lunged, and objects struck. He realized the house was not merely attacking, it was learning him, adjusting strategies to break endurance and will. In the midst of chaos, Jake glimpsed echoes of his friends. Emma, Sophie, Liam, half-formed, distorted, screaming silently, reaching through shadows. Their presence disoriented him, a psychological weapon designed to amplify fear and exhaustion. Each vision seemed to test his sanity, threatening to pull him into despair. The golden light drew him upward. A staircase stretched impossibly, twisting into the ceiling like a coiled serpent. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though gravity itself had been distorted. Shadows lunged from corners, floorboards tilted violently, and the walls closed subtly to pressure his movements. The house orchestrated every element, combining physical force and psychological manipulation in perfect harmony. Jake reached the apex of the staircase and entered a vast chamber bathed in golden light. The room itself seemed alive. Walls pulsed, shadows moved independently, and whispers reverberated, echoing his own fears. Objects floated, spun, and struck with deadly precision. He realized the house was now fully aware of his thoughts, exploiting weaknesses and anticipating reactions. A wall of shadows surged toward him. He ducked, rolled, and struck at the advancing darkness with what little strength remained. Each strike dispersed part of a shadow only for another to replace it. The chamber was a living trap, feeding on fear and exhaustion. Then came the first permanent loss. A shadow resembling Emma lunged from behind, more solid than anything before. Jake tried to grasp it, but the figure dissolved into darkness, leaving nothing but a whispering echo. The house had claimed her completely. The weight of solitude hit him, his remaining hope shrank. Jake pressed forward, following the golden light. The chamber twisted as if it were a liquid labyrinth. Shadows lunged, walls shifted, floors tilted. He dodged falling furniture, rolling beneath beams that threatened to crush him. The house attacked relentlessly, testing endurance and resolve. In one moment of grim clarity, Jake realized the house was not just a predator. It was a predator of perception, memory, and identity. Every corridor, every shadow, every pulse of light was designed to break him, to consume every part of himself. By the end of Part 9, Jake remained the last conscious intruder. The house had claimed his friends completely. Physical attacks, psychological manipulation, and spatial distortion had escalated to full power. He now faced the final confrontation, a decision to continue ascending toward the golden light, into the heart of the house's consciousness, or to be consumed entirely by the labyrinth surrounding him. The storm outside roared endlessly. Inside, the house's walls breathed, pulsed, and flexed. Shadows, light, and space were no longer separate. They were extensions of its will. Jake understood fully, survival required not only skill and endurance but absolute mastery of perception. One misstep would be final. Jake ascended the final staircase, every step weighted by exhaustion, fear, and the crushing knowledge of loss. The golden light above pulsed steadily, omnipresent and unyielding, guiding him into the heart of the house's consciousness. Every corridor, every shadow, every whisper seemed to converge here, pulling him toward a confrontation that felt inevitable. The chamber at the top was vast beyond comprehension. Ceilings arched impossibly high, walls twisted in impossible geometries, and shadows slithered along every surface, independent of light. The golden glow filled the space, casting reflections that multiplied endlessly. Jake realized immediately this was the center, the heart, the mind of the house itself. The house attacked with full awareness. Shadows lunged from every angle, floorboards shifted violently beneath his feet, and objects flew through the air with lethal precision. Jake dodged, rolled, and ducked, every movement a desperate calculation. The house adapted to his every action, anticipating instinct and exploiting hesitation. Whispers filled the chamber, a cacophony of voices, Emma, Sophie, Liam, all distorted, blending with alien tones. They recounted fears, memories, and secrets, twisting reality into psychological torment. Mirrors reflected versions of Jake that were twisted, wounded, and screaming. Every reflection moved independently, mocking, threatening, and attempting to destabilize his mind. Jake understood the rules. The house was a predator not of flesh alone, but of perception, identity, and will. To survive, he had to master both space and mind, separating illusion from reality while navigating impossible geometry. The golden light pulsed faster. Jake approached, understanding that it was both a beacon and a test. Shadows surged to intercept him, stretching impossibly, striking with precision. Planks, shards, and furniture attacked with calculated timing. The chamber itself seemed alive, walls bending to squeeze, ceilings lowering to intimidate, floorboards tilting to destabilize. He lunged toward the light, dodging the relentless attacks. Each step required concentration beyond exhaustion. Each heartbeat threatened to betray him to the house's manipulations. Shadows wrapped around his legs, brushes of cold air struck his skin, and whispers echoed inside his skull. Yet he pressed forward, driven by willpower and survival instinct. The house escalated further. Entire walls moved, corralling him into the center. Objects floated and struck from impossible angles. Reflections in mirrors multiplied endlessly, each threatening to swallow his focus. The golden light shimmered, pulsated, and shifted, challenging his perception. One false step could be final. At the chamber's apex, the light coalesced into a solid, radiant form. It was no longer merely illumination. It was the house, manifesting fully. Shadows and forms of lost friends circled it, semi-solid, wailing silently. The house's mind was visible, a combination of light, shadow, and endless distortion. Jake felt its intelligence, its malice, and its omniscience press against him. He engaged directly, moving through waves of shadows and psychic assaults. Every step forward was fought, every movement calculated. Objects flew with lethal accuracy, walls closed in, and the golden light shifted to distort perception. Jake's mind strained to parse reality from manipulation. His heart pounded with exhaustion, yet his will remained intact. In a final, desperate maneuver, he lunged toward the light itself. Shadows recoiled, whispers intensified, and the chamber seemed to pulse violently. Jake reached out, focusing not on the light but on himself, on identity, memory, and will. The house resisted, twisting corridors, bending walls, and striking with everything it had. A violent surge of energy erupted as Jake made contact. The light flared, shadows shrieked and recoiled, and the chamber quaked violently. For a moment, reality fractured completely, corridors stretched to infinity, walls twisted impossibly, and the echoes of his friends wailed in the darkness. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos halted. The golden light dimmed, shadows collapsed, and the chamber stabilized. Jake staggered, exhausted beyond comprehension. The house no longer attacked. The walls no longer pulsed. Silence reigned, punctuated only by his ragged breathing and the faint echo of the storm outside. Jake realized the house had not been destroyed, but subdued. It had tested him, consumed others, and sought to break him entirely. Yet his will, focus, and understanding of its manipulations had allowed survival. He had emerged as the sole conscious presence within a labyrinthine predator, exhausted but alive. The storm outside continued, relentless. The house loomed above him, silent yet intelligent, its golden light dimmed but still present, a reminder that it remained. Jake knew escape was possible, yet the house would always be there, patient, omniscient, and insatiable. Survival was a victory, but the memory of the lost friends, Emma, Sophie, Liam, would remain forever echoes within the walls of the living, thinking house.